Appropriations Subcommittee on Licensing and Regulatory Affairs and Insurance and Financial Services will come to order. Mr. Clerk, can you please take the roll?
Chair Skaggs.
Here.
Representatives Brixey.
Here.
Morse.
Here.
Martis.
Here.
McKinney.
Here.
Shooty. Here. Horton.
Here.
And DeBoer.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, all members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Martis moves to approve the minutes from February 27th meeting without objection. So ordered. Welcome, members. Today we have a presentation from the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission. Executive Director Kristen Staley is here for her presentation. Welcome, Director. You have the floor.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chairman and Vice Chair and Chairman, Minority Chairman Shooty. Thank you all so much for letting me have a couple minutes today to speak with you. It's nice to see your faces again. So you all have a copy of my presentation in front of you, and hopefully, I heard last time, Chairman Skaggs, you gave a little homework when Director Brown was here. So hopefully, yes.
Hopefully it's more successful than when I did that at college.
Oh, well, okay, me too. So I'm just going to, so my plan here today is, because you have it all in front of you and I want to make sure that I have time for questions at the end of this, I'm going to give a quick overview. We're familiar a little bit about what I've been here in front of you before, so I'm going to give a quick overview about what we do just as a refresher. An oversight, an overview of what we do in terms of internal controls for our grant management, and the statewide impact that we've been seeing. We've been doing this now for 6 years. This is our 6th grant year, and we've been able to actually start to really see some trickling in measurements and changes out statewide, and so I'm really excited to talk to you about that. But first and foremost, right, the reason I'm in front of you is that we have an executive recommendation for FY25. This coming year is a slight change, and yes, I do know that we are the largest piece of that pie under the large budget, and it is, this year it is a total increase that the executive recommendation is requesting of $37.4 million. That is specifically for MIDC grants. These grants go directly to the local systems. This is a total increase for two things. One, to implement our final 2 standards. No more standards pending. So this is it. We've hit to the end of that rainbow. Standards, what we call 6 and 7, which I'll talk a little bit more about. These are caseloads and attorney qualifications. And that's what we estimate around $12.85 million. And then an additional estimate of an increase to the baseline of our grants. We've been running a little underfunded from what the Commission has been approving and what we've seen needed locally to the actual appropriations. And this is a baseline adjustment. So it's a total increase for grants. And in terms of operations, really no change. I just put the basic math separation up there, but really it's no FTE changes, slight adjustments for economics and IT needs. As a refresher, the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission, we are required by a governing act to both develop and oversee the implementation of minimum standards for the implementation of and delivery of public defense locally. We administer grants for local systems to come into compliance with these standards. We monitor and ensure compliance of these grants and of the standards locally. We are mandated to collect and analyze the data of how these services are being delivered. And then we are also given a mandate to encourage best practices out into the field. We are a commission. We have 19 commissioners. 18 are appointed by the governor. 1 is a seat that is reserved for the chief of the Supreme Court. And as you'll see, this list is a huge swath of all the criminal justice stakeholders out there, including members represented by the House the House here, as well as the Senate. We have a staff that serves the commission. Underneath me, I have an additional 17 staff members, which really ranges the gamut from my largest part of my team is what I would call a field staff, or underneath my regional manager team. They're the ones out in the field. We've cut up the state into 6 regions. They're all attorneys who have a long history of working in public defense. We do have a training analyst, as well as a newer position that we were just receiving funding from the Department of Justice to help implement a new training program for attorneys who are working in youth defense, which is something that we're looking towards, as I know that you all have, and thank you very much, House members, for passing a bill that would help expand our office into working in youth defense. That's a different conversation, but it's something that we're looking forward and help secure federal dollars to help us prep and plan for that. We also have a grants team and a research team that helps with oversight and implementation of our grants. And as you noticed, our budget really is about implementing these grants locally and in making sure that the local systems, 133 local systems, can access this funding to make sure that they're meeting our indigent defense standards. Like I said, our last two standards are in front, have fully been approved, and as by the end of next year, we expect to see all 9 of these standards implemented across the state, which is pretty darn exciting, I gotta tell you. It's been 10 plus years to get to this point. It's been a long road, but it has been monumental in terms of the amount of change that we've seen locally. All of these standards mirror national best practices under the American Bar Association. And in fact, we're even exceeding some of those national standards in the ways that our local systems have been willing to innovate and increase and encourage best practices. But the 2 that are circled here, these are the ones that would be implemented. They are new. That is a part of the funding request for this coming year. It is about indigent defense workloads, which would cap the amount of caseloads a public defender would have to either 150 felonies or 400 misdemeanors per year, and a qualification review, meaning that attorneys aren't assigned cases that they aren't qualified to take. Unfortunately, that is the case in some places now, in many places, that because we have, whether it's an attorney shortage or just too many cases coming in, that we have some people who are fresh out of law school taking cases that are perhaps capital cases and they really shouldn't be. We aim to change that, and that really is about best practices. That really is not serving the clients in our community well. Both of these standards, again, fall under best practices and are coupled with all the other ones that we've already seen being implemented locally. The grants, again, the big pot of money, right? That is what's in front of you. Currently, right now, the FY24 total approved funding by the commission equals about just over $280 million. Now that's a big number. It's not just state money. It is also partially a local share. So there is, a local. Each one of the 133 systems has a part to play in this. It is, while you can't really see it on this pie chart, there is a very small sliver that's not listed, but it is about $300,000 that is we receive or estimated to receive from compensation of clients in terms of those who are deemed partially indigent, and it's a reimbursement process. Given back to the state, part comes back to the MIDC, part stays locally to work and to fund indigent defense services. And then the majority, which is this $220 million or so, it comes from state general dollars. This is what's been approved and is currently in effect right now for this year. The best part to talk about this, though, is that this money goes directly to funding public defenders. This is not money that goes to things you can't see. This goes directly to people who are there out in the field, in the community, serving people living in poverty, facing criminal offenses, facing the toughest parts, probably the toughest moments of their lives. This funding goes to not just public defenders, but to social workers, but to investigators on staff, but to experts who are out and helping, build a case and defending folks who are facing criminal charges. And of course, there are other parts of this pie. Of course, it's things like equipment, services in order to run public defender offices, experts and investigators that aren't on staff but uncontracted so that we can increase and better the cases that come through. And of course, training. Training, by far, it's less than 1%. I did that on purpose to show you that it's really, by far, the biggest bang for your buck. We only spend around $1 million for about 1,600 attorneys across the state. And it has been a huge culture change from what we've seen. Really just having that be part of our standards and putting that funding out in the field. This grant money, but we also understand very much within our staff and amongst the commission that we are stewards of state dollars, that these are taxpayers' money. This comes primarily from general funds. So we have implemented over these past handful of years a very thorough and continuous oversight process that we have for our grant management program, for managing our grants. It happens all year round. Now, I put this up here, I'm not going to read it to you, but really, frankly, this is to show you what we are doing throughout the entire year. Our grants team and our research team and our field team that is out helping with technical assistance, ensuring compliance, truly court watching, being out and being the eyes and ears in the field. We are making sure that compliance is happening, that contract compliance is happening, that quarterly reporting is occurring, that quarterly reporting is correct, and if there is a problem with reporting, we're going back out and we're fixing it, that if there is issues with spending this funding, we watch every single penny that comes in. It goes through our doors and out into the local systems. Sometimes it's a little bit slow, I have to tell you. We only are a team of 18 plus me, or 17 plus me, and we only have a small grants team of about 3 people. So to watch every single penny, which is a must for us, it does take a little bit of time. But we conduct all the compliance reviews. We go back and forth. We have, and I'll jump over to this one because it's not just about an annual process throughout the year. It's also about the multifaceted steps and tools that we use throughout the year. So things like having annual audits that we contract with a CPA firm. We use graded rubrics to measure compliance that have been approved, that have been conducted and created from our research director and our team and approved by the commission. And all local systems know it's coming. It's part of the grant manual. We have a grant manual that annually is updated that shows what is an allowable and permissible use for these grant funds. We have implemented a couple years ago a grant management system called eGrams. It's similar to what other state departments use. I believe the state police uses it, DHHS uses it. This is a program that is familiar for a lot of local systems. It has dramatically changed the way that we're able to analyze and collect and look at the data that comes into to our office, and to make sure that things are being done appropriately and money is being spent wisely. We have an annual grant agreement, a grant contract that lays out exactly what we expect to see in our quarterly reporting, that shows that we require financial status reports, program reports, attorney payments, and workloads. And like I said, we have court watching continually throughout the year. Our regional manager team, at the very bare minimum, puts eyes on every single one of our 133 systems and court sites at least twice a year, because not just because we want to make sure that we don't want to catch people, it's more that we want to make sure that the partnership is there, that the local citizens know that we're there to help them think through any technical assistance issues, troubleshooting things that just aren't working out. Like, how can we make this work for these places? Because there's a lot of flexibility. We know that what fits and works in Detroit may not work in Iron County. That's the whole point of really this experiment of the MIDC. A lot of local control and a lot of cooperation at the local systems, but with oversight. So I jumped through a lot of the compliance part of this. What we're seeing since we've had the grants flowing, and I mentioned for 6 years now. 25 would be our 7th year. I remind you that we started a year right before COVID, so it's been quite the adventure, I will say. So the first year of every brand new program was in fiscal year 19. We were learning a lot in that very first year, and then the next couple of years we had to learn to redo everything because the entire world was redoing how they did business. But we stayed steadfast, and with this grant funding flowing, and with the standards out and being implemented and mandated, and the support of our state legislature and high up in the executive branch and in the judiciary branch, we were able to really see massive changes. So here's just some basic facts, and I'm going to jump into after this. This is kind of foundational questions of like, what does it look like out in the field? Like I've mentioned, we have 133 local indigent defense systems. Well, this means counties, but this also means cities. Detroit, for example, is a local funding unit. This also means townships. The Grosse Points are funding units in and of themselves. Some of them are regionalized, so we don't actually receive 133 grants anymore. We receive about 120. Fantastic, because we've seen that best practice at being implemented where counties are partnering, whether they're in shared judicial circuits or counties that have just traditionally worked well together. Amongst those systems, we have now 34 defender offices covering about 40 counties, including regionalized offices. And the remainder of those systems out there, they use something called a managed assigned counsel program. Now, this is where there's an attorney administrator who is independent of the judiciary, somebody who is either a contracted attorney or a firm, or is an employee of the executive branch of local government. And they oversee the roster of attorneys. Some of these offices are robust and actually have additional staff. There's a few that are implementing having social workers on contract for these contracted attorneys, but still maintaining while it's not a local county office, it still allows for local contracting. Some places are hybrids. Some we see have both a PD office that takes a certain percentage or takes a type of case, and also has a local roster that takes the other percentage or types of case. Lots of innovation out in the field. In Michigan, we now know that there's about 1,625 attorneys who are, I would call a public defender, who take assigned cases, whether they're working within staffed offices at the county level or on contract. This is about 5% of all attorneys that are licensed in the state of Michigan. Now, I couldn't tell you the stat until a couple years ago, but we know now that about 85% of all Michiganders that walk into the courthouse for arraignments and are facing charges in our courts are eligible for indigent defense services. So they meet that poverty threshold that are coming in to the courthouse. This is pretty traditional across the nation. We see somewhere between 80 to 90% of people who are in the court system meet eligibility requirements for public defense counsel. But of all this, for the past 6 years, we've now been at the end of FY23, we know based on our compliance reports and our reporting that 99% of the systems out in the field are compliant with our funded standards. Now, that doesn't include the 2 new standards that we expect to see implemented next year with support and funding. That includes caseloads and attorney qualifications. But that means everything else that has been implemented up until this point. It's fantastic. 99% is, you really almost, obviously you can get slightly better than that, but, we're making massive waves and huge systemic changes. We're really taking a huge barge and taking it and turning it around. So what is this doing? It's not just about collecting data. It's about showing what is it really doing to our system and why is this important? Well, from the beginning of our grants, which started in 2019, we saw that trial verdicts and felony cases increased by 54%. Well, why is that important? Majority of cases that come in and out, and maybe this is not news, majority of cases that come in and out of the court system typically end up in a plea. To see an increase in trial verdicts means that we have attorneys out there who are being more zealous and advocating and actually giving a person a shot in their day of court, because we're having more resources going out into the field and allowing public defenders to argue and to fight and to, maybe they don't win. Maybe it's not that case, but that client gets a chance to do so. To have their day in court. And this is specifically in places where we saw public defender offices open, places that traditionally we never saw cases go into trial, smaller counties like Allegan, Shiawassee, places like Jackson that has a very large prison population and a large amount of cases that come in and out of the courthouse. It's pretty incredible to see how that parallels with the public defender offices opening. From the beginning of our our grants opening in 2019, we saw a massive change in interlocutory appeals. Interlocutory appeals are appeals that happen before there's a sentence of a case. So, for example, if there's a motion that an attorney makes and there's a decision by the trial court judge that doesn't seem right, that attorney can appeal that particular motion up through the appellate levels of courts. Sometimes it's search and seizure issues. Sometimes it's evidence issues. This was traditionally rarely something that occurred for public defenders to happen because they never had time, never had training, never had resources or funding simply to do this. We saw this increase by 250%, specifically by indigent defenders. We're able to track that through the Court of Appeals data. That is massive amounts of advocacy work that has come directly from funding these grants. We've seen that the culture is changing amongst public defense, the way that people practice public defense, and the way that people think about it when you're walking in and you say, look, it's not just I get this really awful public defender who doesn't know how to do their job. No, it's quite the opposite. Because public defenders are actually given the time and resources to do their job, they're seeing massive changes for their clients, these are community members who don't traditionally stay, in the court system. They come back and they're your neighbors, right? They're people that you know. There are so many people in our court system that come in and out. And what is happening by providing more resources to our public defenders and our public defense systems is that we're seeing massive changes in terms of who they're hiring and working with. For example, we saw an increase of about 25% from the prior year in terms of use of experts. 280% increase in requests from experts from 2020 in Wayne County alone, which is massive. But why is that important? We know that through national research that using experts and using social workers, which we've seen a massive change in terms of increase in using social workers and client advocates, non-traditional, non-attorneys, and as part of our public defense offices, we know that this massively reduces wrongful conviction rates. That on average it increases possibilities of parole by about 2/3, and that we see a reduction in lengths of prison sentences by about 1/4. That's huge when we start implementing these changes to our PD offices. These resources barely ever existed in any of our offices prior to these grants. In fact, when we talk about social workers or holistic defense, which is the umbrella term that's typically used, when we this is a position that never existed at the trial level in our state. But now we have about 77 positions across the state, working around 39 counties, and we're now working with our local law universities. So Wayne State University has helped us develop a statewide fellowship program, first in the nation. That is going to be providing what is called the Holistic Defense Fellowship Program for Michigan. We just received our inaugural, about 20 or some applicants from grad students to be placed in our public defender offices across the state. This is about building the workforce and changing the way that we think about public defense. It's pretty incredible. Not only are we changing the culture, but when we implemented our standard, what we call Standard 4, is counsel first appearance in all critical stages, we found massive changes. We know that clients are more than 2 times as likely to be released without bail and about 5 times more likely to receive a reduction in bail at arraignment when an attorney is present. And when someone is standing by their side and advocating for them. This is what's happening across the field in our state of Michigan. Prior to our grants, we had one trial court out of our 133 systems that had attorneys show up and were present at all arraignments. Now they're in everyone. I'll give you the statistics kind of silly, right? It's about a couple 1,000% of increase. But frankly, it's been monumental in terms of the client experience that's coming in through this process, but also the experience of efficiency in the court process, changing lives, getting people out pre-trial. There's so much research out there. For those, I know there's a handful of you who are sitting in this committee that were involved in the Joint Task Force on Jail and Pretrial Incarceration. Frankly, just having an incarceration of a few days pre-trial dramatically increases your risk of recidivism, your non-appearance of further court dates, dramatic loss of employment, breaking up the family, of housing, all the things that could possibly happen to you when you're locked up and before you're even convicted or sentenced or even had your day in court. But we know from defenders out in the field that we're actually getting anecdotes back, and a lot of narrative back showing that clients are actually much more receptive, that the shared confidence and trust is built really fast when we have a client there immediately seeing an attorney right away. That the clients are much more comfortable and less nervous, that they show up, they have much more trust in the process. So it's not just, which frankly is almost enough to say that they're released much faster, but really the process itself has changed. The two standards that are that have recently been approved and that we're hoping to implement next year, workloads, standards 6 and 7, are attorney workloads and attorney-client qualifications. In Michigan specifically, we've had a study that's been conducted. We frankly are able to say that every dollar spent hiring a new public defender to reduce caseloads will reduce incarceration costs by about just over $6, $6.31. Because the reason being is that attorneys, when they're given more time and capability and resources to actually focus on the case at hand, rather than it being a very fast conveyor belt of justice, if you will, being overworked, we know that attorneys are actually able to focus more, to actually give more more research, more time, more advocacy, everything to that client in front of them. And it's not just this fast-paced, quick plea. This is a study that's been conducted that's still being worked on, and it's pretty amazing that we actually have this information. This is a study that was done from counties in Michigan, but also nationally. It was a couple other counties that were also studied, and frankly, this is something that we saw in all of the places, that the more you invest in public defense, being able to have time and resources, the capacity to do the work, the less you're going to see their clients being incarcerated on the other side. And it's not just for pretrial, but it's also for lengthy prison sentences or wrongful convictions. The more time and resources you have, the less on the back end that you're going to see people walk out of the court system, either being rehabilitated faster or just simply because they're not supposed to be there because of reduction in wrongful convictions. And I've mentioned a couple times, but I cannot overstate it. While I don't necessarily have stats to show you, I have a long list of attorneys and defenders and county stakeholders just providing us feedback all the time, providing our regional managers and our field staff feedback about the massive changes that we're seeing. Attorneys are able to be zealous advocates, again, if they're public defenders. Number one, because one of our standards, we call it Standard 5, but it's judicial independence. Attorneys are no longer paid or selected or approved by the judiciary. They are independent. They are just like the prosecutor's office, just like a retained counsel, if you were able to afford counsel. They don't have that pressure under their thumb. They don't have to be thinking, well, if I push back and have this motion or do X, Y, and Z in front of the judge, they're not going to pay me next week. They're not going to select me for this case. That happened, unfortunately, quite frequently. We now know that that's pressures and there's fears and of repercussions are taken away. That means that that advocates are being, able to be very zealous, as they should be, as we're required to be as public defenders. We're seeing with counsel at first appearance, but also with our standards that require quick and upfront client meeting and confidential meeting space, standards that streamline screening for indigency. Clients are immediately being triaged, especially those offices that have social workers or client advocates. They're being identified for mental health needs or other social needs like housing issues or employment issues, getting in touch with their family, all these things that our clients are able to access simultaneously while their charges are moving forward and the case is because that also helps them participate in their criminal process. It's just amazing to see the improvement. Again, I'm not going to read you the quotes, but this is really one of the biggest changes out there is the anecdotal evidence. And then, frankly, it's not just locally that is people internally that are watching and seeing all this massive change, it's nationally, right? When we began this process many, many years ago, well before the MIDC Act was enacted, we had, there was this study, right? For those who've been part of the public defense transition for a long time, there was a study in 2008 called Race to the Bottom from the National Legal and Defender Association. It was pretty scathing, right? It showed that we were well beyond, at 44th out of 50 in terms of how we ranked in serving public defense, that we were well over $100 million plus out of below the average of spending, meaning that we weren't investing in what we needed to be investing in our communities for public defense, well below the national average, in fact, well on the bottom. 15 years later, the Department of Justice released a report recently showing that we are the model that other states should be looking at. That we are not only, it's not simply because of the money, but it's the way that we're actually implementing and doing the work. That our experiment of the MIDC, this is working. That we're having the partnership locally being a huge partner, but that the oversight that we have, that the investment, that the standards that we're implementing, it works. It's really, well, you all understand, in 15 years, sometimes that can feel like a flash of an eye. So it's pretty incredible to see what we've been able to accomplish over this past decade plus. And that is all I really have for you all. I'm happy to answer any questions about the budget in front of you, or impact, or the way that we conduct our business.
Thank you, Director. Members, any questions? Representative Schutte.
Thank you, Chair Skaggs, and thank you very much for your presentation. Before I ask my question, I just have one comment for our committee. I'd like to wish a very happy 29th birthday to Nancy DeBoer, our colleague. So just wanted to make sure we properly recognized her birthday today. Secondly, if I may ask a question here. So I appreciate the efforts to provide adequate attorney compensation from the MIDC. I'm just wondering, from conversations I've had with some of my local county prosecuting offices, and just discussions I've seen taking place across the state. Have you seen while the increased compensation for MIDC has helped your staffing levels, have you seen that impact any of the staffing for prosecuting attorney offices? I understand that's a different side of the bench, if you will, but given that you operate statewide, I'm sure you have an interesting perspective on what we may be facing.
Sure. Yeah. Yes. Of course, we've certainly heard issues of local prosecutor staffing. Frankly, it's an issue statewide of attorneys who are willing to serve in public service. It's not just public defense. It's not just prosecution. It's also in civil service issues. I'm a commissioner on the Access to Justice Commission that the state court provides, and this is something that we all have to work on together. It is what I would call an ecosystem of attorneys who are willing to do this type of work and to serve the public. So yes, of course, I think that there's an attorney shortage across both sides of the bench. The funding for prosecutors, we support the funding being increased for prosecutorial attorneys, absolutely. The standard to increase funding for defense attorneys was something that was it's a national standard. This is raising the benchmark up to meet, the bare minimums of what we see across the country in terms of national rates. It's also, there's a guidance that it brings it up to the measurement of the AG's marker in terms of the assistant attorney generals, and so that's part of the standards. But locally, yeah, it's all local decisions. As long as they meet the bare minimum, that's as far as we conduct. These aren't our attorneys. These are local attorneys that are staffed or contracted. Yep, sure, of course.
Representative Morse.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director Saleh, for your presentation. So first, something I think the legislature should just pay attention to, because in recent history, Michigan has had is one of the states that has the longest sentences. And so it'll be interesting to watch as those averages maybe go down. I don't know if we have any data on that yet.
Well, we're hoping. It is something that we're watching. We're not quite there yet. Like I said, we're 6 years in. We are in talks now with a lot of people are watching, other national researchers and foundations and things. So we are hoping to be able to have a bit of a deeper dive into the nuts and bolts of these impacts. So that is something I'm hoping to see. I don't have it yet, but that is my hope.
Well, because you talked about the
Yeah.
money, right? So that impacts if we have, then we're spending less money on that side. So I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. But I did have a question, and you did elaborate on it a little bit, but I would like you to sort of comment on the use of social workers. And is it connecting people to social determinants of health that just somehow impact? Can you just elaborate on how you see that impacting the system?
Oh, I'd be happy to. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Think of it as it's a true wraparound system, right? As a person walks into the door, majority of the time, if they're facing criminal charges, it's not just because it's only one singular issue that's happening in their lives, right? There's most likely something else. This is national data or just local state data that we know a lot of folks who enter the courtroom doors maybe have some substance abuse issues or mental health issues or other, family issues at home, or just because, frankly, if they qualify for the public defense services, they're living in poverty. So there's a lot of other things that are surrounding them and providing issues in life that aren't just related to criminal charges. So having a social worker or a client advocate on staff to, frankly, attorneys and social workers are trained differently. It's two different professions. They are both there to serve the client and to make sure that they are able to succeed, but they approach it differently. And you're right. It's about making sure that clients are both connected to the social services that are out there to help them succeed and be better, productive citizens once the case is over. But also, it's out there. A huge part that our social workers play that we see out in the PD offices is to help with mitigation and sentencing time. So to show the person, the judge or the jury or whomever, that look, this is a whole person. That there's more to this person than just a criminal charge, that they have they have a family, they have a job, they done X, Y, and Z. I have heard from judges across the state that they love these mitigation reports, that this is something they never were able to access before. It helps people. We also fund defenders who work in specialty courts, so drug courts or veteran courts and things like that's also a huge part of it as well. So,
Just one follow-up, if I may. So the judges are responsive to the fact that taking into the whole person into account, and they respect that and are changing accordingly?
Yes, we do see that across many places. Again, it's because these are brand new positions that we were never able to fund before, that without the ability of the MIDC to encourage best practices and fund this as an element of our grants, we've never been able to even have judges have these mitigation reports in front of them, unless, frankly, you were retaining an attorney. Yep.
Representative McKinney.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you so much, Director, for being here. My question is around the last slide. You mentioned in 2008 we were pretty much the bottom of 5 states in terms of public defense, bottom 6, and we had a bunch of gaps that need to be filled. And I'm so happy to hear that we're going to be the model, or we are the model for other states as of right now. And can you kind of talk about, you touched on some discrepancies still, some improvements we need to still be making, but in terms of the gaps that still need to be filled, can you kind of highlight some of those, and then what our other states are doing in terms of the attorney shortage that we should be looking at, and things of that nature to keep the ball moving, because we don't want to move backwards. We want to keep moving forward.
Yeah, no, excellent points. So first off, yes, we were bottom of the barrel. You're absolutely right. I was thrilled. Happy to send the committee a copy of this report. Not that you need to read it all, but there's an entire chapter on Michigan in this very lengthy report that covers the entire country. That's how incredible it was to show that. Wow, we actually were able to do this and be successful, or at least in the past 10 years that we've been in existence. I'll touch on the attorney shortage issue. This is something, it's not a Michigan issue solely. It is, as I mentioned, attorneys who work in public service nationwide. And it's not, we certainly saw a downward turn due to COVID, but I think it was on a downward trajectory in general. I think that, it's really it's so important to work with our law schools, with our universities, even with high schools, people who are feeding in, that are growing our next workforce population, right? That we have an entire generation behind us that, should be encouraged to be a part of this, civic education and to be a part of working for our community. Our office, I take that very seriously. Are the two standards that we have to implement next year that I hope to see, workloads and qualifications, directly relate to attorney shortages. I have systems that are very nervous about, look, maybe we're short only about 5 attorneys, but hiring 5 might as well be a million, right? It's really that hard sometimes. So we've taken a lot of initiatives. I mentioned that holistic fellowship. We have also been working with universities to put on speakers panels and, doing a lot of job recruitment from our PD offices. We have, I have a staff member and a couple other offices who've been working with the Michigan Center for Civic Education and putting on mock trial teams for our local high schools. We've been seeing that increase. All sorts of really we have up in the UP, our Marquette system has hired a recruitment and retention position to help us statewide to recruit, literally go out and see what can we do to build interest into working in public defense. I think that this is because we didn't have the jobs before. We have 5 law schools. Our law schools really needed to be told that we actually have jobs, that we have public defender offices. I had a lot of places that were shocked to hear it, that were constantly sending attorneys or new graduates out of state and never looking internal. So it's really about just bringing our chiefs and our defense leaders to those places and helping them recruit. Nationwide, one of the biggest things I'm seeing, honestly, is loan repayment programs. That's a huge thing. I can tell you I'm a beneficiary of the federal loan repayment, and I was very happy to say that. I got very lucky. I've been working in public service my entire life after graduating law school, and I got very lucky. Not many people are able to say that, and if there are a lot of states out there that are also helping, whether they're making partnerships with our local, internal universities and ensuring that if you're willing to do a couple years and stay here and work in Michigan and do a public service, whether it's public defense or prosecution or civil legal aid, we'll help you pay your loans, or we'll help you pay because it's about building a workforce. So that's something I'm seeing, and it's a really great innovation. And in terms of what next steps, what other gaps are out there? Well, I did quickly mention it. The House very graciously passed a bill that's been pending out there, HB 4630, which would expand our office into youth defense work. That is something that we see in many other states, whether it's an Indigent Defense Commission or states that, for example, like Massachusetts or Colorado, that have a statewide public defender office, already have youth defense under their umbrella. It's a very small population, and compared to the adult population, I think it's in our state, it's about somewhere between 8 and 10% of the population. So it's very small, but expanding into that, helps make sure that those individuals don't come back into the adult system, right? There's a lot of things that can be done to make sure that we can better ourselves in that way.
Thank you.
Of course.
Anyone else? Representative DeBoer.
I heard of one program where I think it was Kentucky or Tennessee, where the chief of police and the mayor of the city brought in kids that had been arrested for their first time, and brought them in with guardian or parents. They met for 6 weeks, an hour at a time, and all they did was talk about character qualities, that if they worked on those qualities, they wouldn't be having this situation again. And so it was a kind of a very hopeful process for them. And they said afterwards, it was all the guardians and parents that came forward and said, thank you so much for giving us a way to help these kids and to see a better future for them, because kids are so easily locked into, you call me a criminal, I'm a criminal for life. And we don't want to do that to them. So that had the opposite effect. And as of that conference I was at, none of them had recommitted, which is usually it's like a 75% recidivism rate with youth. So I just kind of wonder if we could do something like that.
Sure.
to help
Yeah, no,
kids.
that's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. Yes, there are, separate from our office and in Laura, a lot of programs that are being implemented with the Juvenile Justice Task Force bills that were passed a handful of months ago. This coming year, I know there's a lot of, Reps McKinney, I know you're very familiar with it, that there's a lot of changes afoot in terms of prevention services, diversion services. Yes, I think the answer is yes, and I'm very hopeful to see programs like that if they don't already exist, to be expanded.
Yeah. The other story that comes to mind is our police chief instituted a character focus throughout the police department. And so with each offending officer, they have a series of meetings, and it comes down to the last meeting. And he said, at this last meeting, he said, we're not going to talk about what happened anymore. He said, but I just want to mention 3 different character qualities that if we could work on these things, we won't be in this situation again. And again, that was a hope-filled presentation. And he actually, afterwards, the union representative came up to him and thanked him for that disciplinary conversation.
Wow.
Because he said he really helped the person. And that had never happened in his decades of leadership.
Sure. No, that's wonderful. But you're absolutely right in terms of the concept of labeling theory. When someone is called a criminal, they are a criminal. And it's not just children; it's people. That it transcends. Through adulthood as well. And I think going back to the question about social workers or client advocates or just practicing holistic defense, that is another huge part of this. That when we are providing resources through these grants, clients that come in and are facing it doesn't matter if whatever the charges that they're facing, they're being treated like human beings through this process.
We have to separate behavior from labeling a person.
Of course.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, members. Just a couple of thoughts. One, Director, thank you.
Of course.
And thank you to your whole team. I think that it's very clear that we had a justice system in this state that was completely broken. We had a pretrial system that encouraged people to lose their jobs, lose their housing, sometimes lose their kids because of excessive bail. We had some of the highest sentencing rates in the country, certainly in the region. We had a cost at the Department of Corrections, which was higher than the amount spent on higher education. I mean, we were just doing everything that you possibly could do to move us in the wrong direction. But most importantly, we didn't have a system that was based on fairness and justice. And I think the fact that we have 85% of eligible defendants, most of which are able to access defense, is extraordinarily important to get fairness and justice for all, so that the outcomes are more in tune with, if they are found guilty, are more in tune with the crime. So thank you. A couple of quick questions. Obviously, I've been interested in years on pretrial, and I think it's probably one of the most important things that this program is able to do. You noted that we saw a decrease in the amount of bail, which I just think is fundamentally important to a system of fairness and justice. What is the impact of that on subsequent court appearances, right? If bail was like skin in the game so that they show up to court, are we with a bail amounts or with recognizance bonds, are we seeing similar court appearance rates
Yes. So again, anecdotal evidence shows that we are seeing a massive increase of attorneys participating in the process, meaning they're much more likely to show up because a handful of things. Yes, they've been released. There's a sense of trust being built faster with having a defender by their side who is present at arraignment right away. Yes, we are absolutely seeing the judiciary, treating clients slightly differently because they're having an advocate there arguing, making mitigation arguments for bail. It's not, arraignment process is truly just about being a bail argument, right? Whether or not this person should be going home. Are they a flight risk? Are they a risk to the community or themselves? At that point in that moment, if you have somebody who is trained to make that argument for you, rather than just have a person who is perhaps never been through this process, or even if they have, it's a very frightening moment. So to have somebody there who's trained and truly knows the process, we're seeing a massive change in terms of the client experience. Treating them like a person.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that there's a 25% reduction in sentencing.
Sure.
So, I don't know how many lawyers are actually here if we only just have the one. But, well, I mean, on the members. Anyway. Okay, so explain to the non-lawyers who are here that if we have this data on 25% reduction in sentencing, explain to me your answer to Rep. Morris's question about average sentencing lengths.
Sure.
And how we don't have the data for that.
So that data is national data. So that is what we see. There's a handful of national reports out there that have followed, whether it's statewide public defenders' offices or large cities, places like Philadelphia or New York. They all consistently show a dramatic decrease in sentencing length when we have an offender who is resourced with investigators, experts, and social workers. That data, that's what's in front of you, is a national kind of an average. And so when we see that happening, Michigan's different, but we're not that different from other big states, right? They're implementing public defense and doing it with well-resourced attorneys. So it's pretty easy to translate that information into what we're doing here. Because we're only 6 years in, I don't have yet the exact information from us statewide, but we are seeing, there was an initial Michigan study done on arraignments where we saw plea agreements happening 13% faster, and those meaning that right away, that whether or not they pled guilty or not, that the process was being fast, right? But fast, but appropriate, so that their attorney was there, the client was there, the decision makers all were able to come to a point and say, like, all right, we don't need you to come back for another court appointment, because we all know that people who have to come back to court, perhaps they have to take off job, they have to get childcare, they have to do all X, Y, and Z's to make that happen. It's being efficient, but with quality and with due process. And so that's the type of data we do have right now. But the 25% is a national average.
Okay. So then maybe that is something that we need to work on to make sure that you have the resources and the FTEs to be able to, or work with an outside foundation, I don't know, Joyce or something, to work on our what impact are we having that will get us down to just a Great Lakes average of sentencing and not to be, completely an outlier. Last question then, and I know we had some individual conversations on this, but just can you expand a little bit more? I know you had the slide on it, but a little bit more on the safeguards that are in place to make sure that taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely. Especially so that we're not seeing what could essentially be an interest in over litigating in order to bill the system. So, what safeguards are in place, and are there additional safeguards that could be in place to make sure that we're accomplishing our goal here of fairness and justice, but doing so in the most efficient way possible.
No, great questions. I mean, and you're right. This is, I wanted to make sure that I started off with making sure that you all understand that we care immensely and take the responsibility very seriously about being stewards of our taxpayer dollars. This is a big budget. We are a newish program in the grand scheme of state government, right? And in many respects, we're not still building the plane while flying it, but we still are. We're over 10 years in, but we still have 2 more standards to implement, and more, that does mean that there's a slight increase of requests in dollars, because when we implement new standards, there's additional resources that are needed, specifically to fund defenders, right? To make sure that we actually have people out in the field doing the work. But that also means the budget grows. And so yes, I have a grants team and I have a research team. My grants team is 3 people. I have a grants director and 2 analysts, and I have a research director and 1 analyst. I also have an analyst on my compliance and field team who helps with attorney lists and attorney payments. That's it, right? And my field team are my regional managers, who are trained attorneys out in the field watching, eyes on the ground. As I mentioned, every single penny that comes through us as grant dollars out into local systems, we track. We are very serious about that, but it does take time. Sometimes there are issues where we're not able to catch everything if something is not being spent appropriately, or not by any nefarious reasons, but because these are new programs, right? That local systems are also learning like we are. Perhaps that, there are, we have to also create our grant manual, and we update it annually when we realize that, oh, whoops, we aren't supposed to be spending, those are not the parameters of certain types of spending. Or perhaps there are billing issues locally with attorneys. That's why we require attorney payment lists and attorney lists of case assignments, because we want to be able to match. We can run reports right now to show you how many cases and the amount of payments that our contracted attorneys out in the field are receiving. Not just because it's part of the standard compliance that we have to monitor, but also because it's a huge, as you saw, 90% of the grant funding goes to attorneys or to defenders in those offices. So we track that money very specifically. If there is something out in the field, like we see attorneys who are, it's odd that they're billing 100 hours in a day or something along those lines. Again, nothing nefarious, but, something seems amiss. So we provide the technical assistance to go out and to help work with the local system to figure out, well, what really is happening. There have been issues with certain counties, for example, where places are overspending, and they report overspending, but really that actually didn't happen. But we weren't able to fix it until about 6 months until the next grant year, because grant years go fast. It is pretty amazing how fast 12 months go when you have to hire new people and you have to build new systems, and then all of a sudden it's midway and you realize you haven't spent all the money, you've overspent. That's why we require the quarterly reporting, but sometimes we aren't able to catch it until months later, or even perhaps a year later.
Wonderful. Thank you, Director Staley. Appreciate your
Thank you.
testimony. Next week, we will be back to hear from the Michigan Public Service Commission. Appreciate your time, members. And with that, we are adjourned.